First story: The Bright Light and the Calm Watchdog. I had an unusual visitor on Christmas Day, 2008, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't Santa Claus passing by my house in Bloomington, Indiana. The day started in typical fashion with the opening of gifts around the Christmas tree. I served an early Christmas dinner for family and friends, and everybody departed by 5 p.m., except my sister and brother-in-law who live with me. They were sleeping in a bedroom at the end of the hall with the door open. I went into my bedroom with my dog, Toby, and shut the door securely. I was just dozing off when I heard the latch on my bedroom door open. I waited several seconds for my sister or brother-in-law to ask me whatever they came to say, but there was no other sound. It was almost 7 p.m., so my bedroom was pitch black. I had left lights on in the kitchen and the bathroom, and there were lots of Christmas lights in the living room, so the hallway would have been well lit. I would be able to see whoever was at the door just by lifting my head. I pushed the blankets down and lifted my head from the pillow, but just as I would have been able to see who was in the doorway, an extremely bright light hit me right in the eyes. I shielded my eyes and yelled, "Turn out that light. You're blinding me." The light immediately disappeared and I heard the bedroom door latch closed. My bedside light is a touch lamp, so I tapped it on and looked around the bedroom. There was no one in the bedroom except me and Toby. Toby jumped off the bed and went to the door without showing any signs of alarm. At first I wasn't frightened because Toby is a Dutch Shepherd, well trained to be an excellent watchdog and proven personal protection dog. Since Toby was already up, I decided to go let him outside and see what sis or brother-in-law needed. When I went into the hallway, I could see both of them still in bed. I took Toby to the living room to let him outside, and there was nobody there either. So who opened my bedroom door and turned a spotlight on my face? Like most people, the thoughts of loved ones are always close at hand during the holiday season. When I first went to lie down, I was thinking how happy I was that my small family had enjoyed a pleasant Christmas, but it would have been so much better if my mother and brother had still been alive to share it with us. I would like to think it was my brother's spirit stopping by to say, "Merry Christmas. I still think of you, too." I haven't been able to debunk this strange event or find any kind of rational explanation. I'm half afraid that my heart stopped during my sleep and the light I saw was the bright light people report after near-death experiences. Leave it to me to see the stairway to heaven and ruin my chance at eternal paradise by saying, "Turn out that light." I've made a mental note that if I ever see another bright light to clean up my language. Just in case. Second story: The Returned Relative. It was Christmas time of 1995 or 96 at my aunt's house on a reservation in North Dakota. Some of my family was in the living room watching television, the kids were playing in the rooms or sleeping, and my uncle, aunt, and I were sitting at the table putting a puzzle together. My cousin, who worked at a casino, would come home around midnight or 1 a.m. This night, as she pulled up and was walking toward the house, she looked in the window and saw me sitting at the table, my uncle sitting across from me, and someone standing to the left of me and someone standing in the corner, so she continued to walk in the house thinking nothing of it. As we were sitting there talking, she looked at me and asked who was standing next to me a few minutes ago and who was in the corner. I told her no one and she said, "Yeah, there was someone standing next to you." It looked like your mom and she was playing with your hair. I have long hair, which I used to wear down all the time. She said this person was running her hand on my hair, like a mother does to a child. It kind of freaked me out, being I was probably only 12 or 13 at the time. My cousin swears up and down that someone was standing over me rubbing my head and watching me put the puzzle together with my aunt and uncle, and that there was another person standing behind this person. We got around to thinking it was probably her mom she saw. She passed away on her birthday a week before Christmas back in 1992. In my family we consider our aunts and uncles to be just like our moms and dads. After thinking that it could have been her, it didn't scare me so much. However, we couldn't figure out who the person was standing in the corner. And always around Christmas time something strange always happens. And we just think it's her visiting us. Third story: the haunted tree. My parents and I lived in a small home that was around 90 years old. The year would have been 1996. We lived there from the time I was 7 years old to the time I was 19. From the very day that we moved in, I felt that I was not alone. One year around Christmas time, I was having a friend spend the night. The heat had just shut off briefly and she and I were sitting in the living room watching television when the temperature dropped substantially. As I rose to turn up the heat, the Christmas tree began to shake violently. Ornaments were falling off right and left and she and I were terrified. We ran upstairs and lay down on my bed. My white cat curled up with us and my door was open slightly. When I gazed out at the dark hallway, I was horrified to see a tall white figure run down the hall. I turned to my friend and she acknowledged that she had seen the exact same thing. She never spent the night ever again. Fourth story: the figure in the recliner. My mother, to whom I was very close, passed away in 1964 when I was 17 years old. I left home that year and moved to Ontario from Nova Scotia. In 1969 I met a girl whom I will call Karen and we got married in March of 1970. In December of 1971 we were expecting our first child. We were living in a small 1-1/2 bedroom bungalow. There was a fireplace in the living room. My wife and I loved the fireplace and we had it lit every night. It was Christmas Eve, 1971, and we had just finished putting the gifts under the tree and a nice fire gave off a beautiful glow. On the tree, one string of lights, which was supposed to flash, had stopped several days before. It was 5 minutes to midnight when the fireplace suddenly just about went out, and the string of lights started to flash, and the other lights stopped flashing. My wife and I were sitting on the floor and it had become very chilly in the room. I looked over to my lazyboy chair, and a figure was sitting there, my mother with a big beautiful smile on her face. My wife, who had never met my mother, said she could see the same thing. This ghost never spoke, but just kept looking at me and my wife and smiling. At 12 midnight, the fire in the fireplace started up again and the lights on the tree stopped flashing and the others started flashing again. I looked over in the chair and the ghost was gone. No matter what I did to those Christmas lights, they never flashed again. Fifth story: the ghostly Christmas choir. On Christmas Eve night, 1978 at about 3 a.m. in Klamath Falls, Oregon, I was suddenly awakened by a choir singing. The house was new construction, miles from the nearest church. I strained to hear any words that I could understand or a tune that I could identify, but I could not understand the language or tune. I did get a feeling of angelic exaltation, reverence, and gladness of heart. This was truly a heavenly choir lifting their voices on high, singing Hosanna in the highest, in an unknown tongue, without accompaniment of instruments. I examined the television, but it was turned off, as was the radio. I explored outside, but the singing was not heard outdoors. The way the countless male, female and children's voices entwined together, the tonals going from operatic highs to the deepest bass voices in perfect harmony. It must have lasted about 10 minutes, but it was touching for an eternity. A few years ago, there was a wealthy couple who had 2 young children, a boy and a girl. The family lived in a large house in Newport Beach, California. After taking care of their kids all week, the mother and father decided that they needed a break, so they booked a table for dinner at a nice restaurant. That evening, they called a teenage girl they knew and arranged for her to come over and babysit their children while they were out. When the babysitter arrived, the parents told her to fix supper for the kids and put them to bed. After that you can just watch TV and help yourself to anything in the fridge, said the father. And if you wouldn't mind, said the mother, could you watch TV in our bedroom? The kids have been having nightmares recently, so if you hear them crying, you can just go in and calm them down. The babysitter happily agreed and the parents left for their dinner date. The girl gave the children some milk and cookies, then ushered them upstairs to bed. She started to read them a bedtime story and, before long, the little boy and girl were fast asleep. After tucking them in, she switched off the lights and went to watch TV. When the babysitter walked into the parents' bedroom and sat down, she noticed that there was a creepy-looking clown statue standing in the corner of the room. She tried to ignore it, but it looked so eerie and disturbing that it sent a chill down her spine. She felt as though its eyes were staring straight at her while she watched TV. As time passed, the babysitter started to feel more and more uneasy about the clown statue. Whenever she glanced at it, she got the unsettling feeling that it had moved, ever so slightly. Finally, the clown statue began to freak her out so much that she couldn't handle it any longer. She decided to go downstairs and phone the parents. When she dialed the number they had left for her, the mother answered. "Hi, it's me," said the babysitter. "Everything's fine. The kids are fast asleep in bed, but I was just wondering. Would be okay if I watched TV downstairs?" "Of course," replied the father. "But why?" "I know it sounds silly," laughed the girl, "but the clown statue is really creeping me out." "The clown statue?" asked the father. "Yeah, the clown statue in your bedroom," the girl replied. The phone went silent for a moment. "Listen to me very carefully," said the father. "Take the children and get out of the house. We will call the police. Go, now." "What's wrong?" asked the girl. The father gulped and replied, "We don't have a clown statue." For a second, the babysitter just stood there, stunned. Then, she dropped the phone and raced upstairs and grabbed the children. Carrying one under each arm, She raced downstairs again and fled out into the street. Huddled on the sidewalk, comforting the two children, the babysitter looked up at the bedroom window and saw something that made her scream out in horror. Peeking through a gap in the curtains was the white, painted face of a clown. It stared at her for a moment, then sank back into the darkness. Within minutes, the police arrived and cautiously entered the house. In the upstairs bedroom, they found a man dressed in a clown suit. When they arrested him, they found a knife concealed in his costume. The clown turned out to be a mentally disturbed midget who was a convicted murderer and cold-blooded killer. The evil man had been stalking the family for months, lurking in their attic during the daytime and coming out to sneak around the house at night. For weeks, the children had been complaining about a clown statue that stood in their room and watched them sleep, but the parents just dismissed this as nightmares. Second story. There was a 7-year-old girl named Molly who absolutely loved dolls. She collected every doll she could and displayed them on a shelf in her bedroom. She wasn't doing very well in school, so her parents told her that if her grades improved, they would buy her a new doll as a reward. Molly was motivated to try her best and, a few weeks later, her report card arrived from school. She had studied so hard that she managed to get straight A's. Her mother and father were delighted and decided to make good on their promise. The next morning, Molly's mother brought her to the mall so they could go shopping for her gift. As they passed by the window of a second-hand toy store, the little girl grabbed her mother's arm and asked if they could go inside. When they entered the shop, the woman told her daughter she could choose any item she wanted, no matter what price it was. Molly wandered up and down the aisles of the dusty old toy shop until she eventually came to the doll section. On the top shelf, partially obscured by dusty old boxes, was something that immediately caught her eye. It was a clown doll with red hair, yellow eyes and a big red nose. The clown's wizened face was twisted into a malicious grimace and its teeth were sharp and jagged. One of the clown's gnarled hands was clenched in a fist, but the other was holding up 3 fingers. Molly turned to her mother and squealed, "Mommy, this is the one I want." "Are you sure?" asked her mother incredulously. "But, it's so ugly and creepy." The little girl nodded excitedly. "I want it, I want it, I want it." "Well, all right then," said her mother as she took the clown doll down from the shelf and brought it over to the counter. The owner of the store took one look at the doll and said, "I'm sorry, madam. That clown doll is not for sale." "What? Why ever not?" exclaimed the surprised woman. The owner refused to answer. The mother looked down and saw her daughter's eyes welling up with tears. She began arguing with the shopkeeper and offered him more and more money, but he kept refusing. Eventually, she said, "I'll pay you $100, and held out the money in front of him. The owner's eyes grew wide. He hesitated for a moment, then grabbed the money greedily and said, "Okay, you can have it." He put the clown doll in a bag and gave it to the mother. As Molly and her mother walked out of the shop, the owner called out after them. "Just one thing," he said. "Never leave your daughter alone with that doll." The mother and daughter didn't pay any attention to him and left, happy with their purchase. When they got home, Molly immediately rushed into the living room. The girl was overjoyed with her present and spent the rest of the day playing happily with her clown doll while her mother watched television. As the little girl played with the doll, she wondered why it was holding up 3 fingers. Later that night, when Molly went to bed, she placed the doll on the top shelf in her bedroom. Her mother kissed her goodnight and shut the bedroom door. Bright and early the next morning, the mother was cooking breakfast and called out to Molly to wake her up. When she didn't receive an answer after calling her for the 3rd time, the mother began to get worried. She decided to go upstairs and get her daughter out of bed. When she walked into Molly's bedroom, she was horrified to find her daughter lying dead on the floor in a pool of blood. Her throat had been sliced open and her eyes had been poked out. There was a sharp knife embedded in her chest. For a few moments, Molly's mother couldn't believe what she was seeing. But when she looked down and saw the clown doll sitting beside her daughter's mutilated body, she began screaming in horror. The clown doll was holding up 4 fingers. 3rd story. There was a teacher who hated his students. He hated the way they dressed, their odd hairstyles and their bad language. The way they slouched in their seats and the way they stared vacantly at him while he explained some maths problem really got on his nerves. They disgusted him so much that he couldn't bear to be around them. At school, he had a reputation for being strict, mean and unfair. If any of his students did even the slightest thing wrong, he would hand out harsh punishments, sending them to detention or giving them extra work to do. The teenage girls and boys in his class grew to despise him and he delighted in making their lives a misery. One night, as he was relaxing at home, listening to classical music on his record player, the teacher happened to look out the window and something caught his eye. In the window of the building across the road, a figure was dancing around. It was a clown and it seemed to be staring right at him. Unnerved, he quickly closed his curtains and tried to forget about it. The next day, at school, his students were irritating him more than ever. When his back was turned, they would make funny noises to embarrass him. One time, when he sat down at his desk, somebody made a noise. It drove him crazy that he couldn't figure out which of the teenagers was doing it. That night, he was at home, reading a book when he glanced out the window. He saw the clown again. It was dancing around in the same window, waving its hands like a crazy person. When it caught his attention, it reached down and picked something up. It was an axe. As the teacher watched in astonishment, the clown began waving the axe around like a mental patient. It was leering at him with a grotesque grin on its face. The teacher jumped out of his chair and quickly drew the curtains. He thought about calling the police, but what would he tell them? The clown hadn't done anything illegal. Not yet anyway. The police probably wouldn't even believe him. They would just think he was crazy. He decided to put it out of his mind. The next day, in school, the students were all staring at him silently. He wondered what they were up to. When he sat down at his desk, he found out. They has placed a pin on his chair. He jumped up, screaming in pain and clutching his buttocks. The teenagers burst into laughter. "That's it," the teacher shouted. "Detention for everyone. You won't be laughing this evening when you're going home 2 hours late." That night, the teacher was at home, watching a documentary on TV. He happened to look out his window and saw some teenagers gathered across the road. He recognized them as students in his class, and they were spray painting graffiti on the wall opposite him. He had no doubt that the graffiti was about him. It made him seethe with rage. He reached for the phone to call the police. Just then, he spotted a figure hiding around the corner. It was the clown. He was holding an axe in his hands and chuckling to himself. He was just a few feet away from the unsuspecting teens. All of a sudden, the teacher was overcome with horror. He had no idea what the clown intended to do, but he suspected it was something terrible. He had to warn the students. He rushed out of his apartment, bounded down the stairs and ran out into the street. "Watch out! Watch out!" he cried desperately, but he was too late. He could only watch helplessly as the clown attacked his students. He heard their terrified screams as the clown hacked at them with his axe. The teenagers tried to run, but there was no escape. They were cornered and the clown swung his axe, hacking and chopping and slicing, showing no mercy. It was absolute carnage. There was blood everywhere and the sidewalk was littered with severed limbs and chunks of flesh. The teacher covered his eyes. All of a sudden, he heard the sound of sirens and several police cars screeched to a halt in front of him. In the darkness, their headlights illuminated him. He looked down at himself and realized he was wearing a clown costume. On his feet, there was a big pair of clown shoes. "Put it down! Put it down!" he heard the policeman shouting. Then, he noticed the bloody axe he was holding in his hands.